Hey there, thanks again for joining me on my channel. I am just coming back from traveling this weekend to LA for a conference, and I haven't had a lot of time to look at the score editor, but I wanted to share with you some of the highlights that I discovered over the weekend. And after reading the documentation, now I have linked in the description of this at the very top a link to official documentation from Steinberg's. They've made a really nice PDF outlining the new score editor, so I think if you're really interested in diving into it, certainly check back on my channel because I intend on covering this more in the near future. But there is also a really nice PDF that's breaking down a lot of the workflow principles. There is a lot here different from Dorico, so although the graphics look quite similar, there's definitely some important differences that you want to be aware of. What I wanted to do today was highlight a couple of things that I've discovered that I really like, that I kind of wish were features of Dorico. And I'm not sure so much that they're features of the score editor as much as features of the score editor being implemented into Cubase. I also want to just kind of discuss the basic workflow, look at a basic expression map. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I think if somebody has some experience with Cubase expression maps, then having an understanding of how that all connects up will be very helpful. And then probably where I want to start off here is how to set up the score editor as your default MIDI editor, because for me that's actually what I prefer. So I'm going to take myself off the screen here. And I've got a little project behind me here, and I'm going to close up this. So from here, let's say I've just got this basic MIDI track in Cubase set up for French horn. I'll just play it back for you. You can hear it's a very basic little part. But what will happen now is that when I select a part like this, it'll open up the score editor in the lower area, and if I double click on it, it actually opens up the window here, which is much more full featured. If you want to really get into tweaking and modifying your score, I find that this main window is a lot more flexible, has a lot more features built into it than the lower zone. So the lower zone is a bit more of an observational tool so far for me, whereas the main window is a lot more effective. And that's true of the key editor. If you're used to using the key editor in Cubase as well, the key editor has a lot more features. There's a lot more flexibility in there, how you structure your workflow. Okay, so let's talk a little bit first. How do you set up this as your default? So setting up the score editor as your default starts up in the Cubase settings, and you want to go to editors here. And then you want to, usually key editor would be selected here. You want to go ahead and select open score editor as your default. And I also changed this value here, double click opens editor in a window. That seems to mean that if I double click on an event in my window here, that's going to open it up and put that directly into the big window like so. So that's how you can set up the default. Now, one of the cool things that I've discovered is a feature of having the score editor in Cubase is that you can now loop. And this is something I really wish there had been in Dorico. And aside from setting repeats, there really is no way to do this. So let's look at that. So up here in Cubase, if you're a Cubase user, you'll know that the purple bar along the top means that we're looping. But what I can actually do is I can select notes like this, and you see like the selection down here isn't working that well. But if I were to, just to be clear, if you don't have looping on and you hit Option P, so let's say that I were to cut this and I wanted to loop just this first bar, and I hold down Option P, it actually sets the loop markers for me. So I can actually do that even though there's no visual representation of it in the score editor. So from this window I can easily select these. Let's say I select these 4 notes here and I hit Option P. Now you'll notice that it loops, which is actually really nice. I really like that feature because there are times when I just want to write, I want to notate a little motif, and I'm trying to maybe hear it against a harmony. And in Dorico, you have to go back, play, stop, go back, play. Being able to loop is a really nice part of the DAW workflow experience that now you can do here. I don't think it's unique to the score editor as much as it's a feature already built into Cubase and it is applied here. Now, let's talk a little bit about some of the paradigms, the different mind frames that I think are helpful to have when you're working with the score editor in Cubase here, which is new to Cubase 14. A lot of the keyboard shortcuts don't work from Dorico, and I assume that's because Cubase is an older piece of software, already has an enormous library of keyboard shortcuts. There's not just simply not a straightforward way to sync those up, okay? So if you're using a lot of keyboard shortcuts, unfortunately, some of those won't work. You can move notes around using, if you use Option and you do up and down arrows, then it will move them vertically like that. If you use Option and left and right, you can also move them around like that. And how far they move depends on this quantization value. So if you want to move them around by eighths and so on and so forth. So you probably have experienced a little bit of that in Dorico before. So you can move things around. There's some of the same keyboard shortcuts from Dorico do work here, and I'm really grateful for those. But a larger idea here about the score editor that's unique to Cubase, and I think informs one's mind frame when you're working with it, is that in MIDI, in Cubase, there really is it handles MIDI differently than it handles score. So MIDI just has essentially like note on, note off messages, velocity, length, things like that. Very basic. A score note has different features that Cubase is tracking, things like what's the articulation, for example, which I am going to get into just in a couple of minutes, talking about a basic expression map and also how you can assign articulations. So realize that actually the score editor is like a superimposed presentation of the MIDI. They do update each other. So if I change, this C here to a C sharp, you'll notice that that changes in the MIDI. And actually, let me just kind of demonstrate that. So if we were to have this window open, let's see how I could do that. I could maybe open up the lower window and open up the score editor as well. And then let's see, open the score editor. Can I do that? Is it going to let me? There we go. So let's say that I wanted this to be in the key editor. Where's my notes? There they are. So you should see that if I grab this note here and I move that up to C sharp, you can see that it changed right here in the score editor. And likewise, I can't update it in the lower zone. I haven't figured out quite how to do that yet, but I can do that in the full window version. So right now, if I were to, let's see, actually that seems to be an interesting thing that I had discovered. Well, I don't want to get too far off track. So I've talked about the looping feature, and I've talked about how to set the default. One other aspect to the paradigm of how Cubase views the score that is rather unique, and I read about this in the documentation that I've linked in the description, is that the instrument assignment, whether this MIDI part is assigned to a horn or a timpani or a violin, the score editor in Cubase will actually automatically change what kinds of items, what kinds of things can be modified about it. So articulations that are available, different things in the score editor window. So let's take a look at that. So this is actually set at as chimes, even though back here it's on a track called horn. So it will be easy to switch this out. Let's say I were to grab this part and I go up here to the score menu, and I don't see change instrument type for the active track at the moment. So I guess it's not for the part as much as the track, right? So let's say I've selected this track, Now this was available earlier, so I am a little confused about why it's not showing there now. There you go. I guess I have to be in the score editor in the lower zone in order for that to be available. So I can actually go ahead and I can select this change instrument type for active track. And then from here I can select my instrument. Like let's say I want a French horn, and I'm going to go with F treble clef like that. And what that does in essence is it does change some of the items that are available over here in the left hand side, maybe under articulations, things like that. It's intended to sort of optimize the workflow around what that instrument is. But that's a very, very different paradigm from what we have in Dorico, where you assign these things and they're sort of fixed, right? So that's a good thing to keep in mind. One thing from last week that I did discover how to do and I wanted to show you is how to add chord symbols inside the score editor. So if we're in the score editor here and I wanted to add, let's say, a C major chord here. Normally in Dorico, I might hit Shift Q, which actually just brings up my quantize panel. What I want to do is actually come over here to this text. This text is not available. This is not typical to Dorico, but if I go in here, I see chord symbols. And now when I come down here, you'll see that there's sort of a chord symbol, the C7 icon that's attached to my mouse. And if I go ahead and click on that C, you do see a familiar chord symbol entry field that you would also see in Dorico. So I can just type in C there, right? And I get a C. And then when I'm back in the project here, you'll also notice that it's been added to a chord track. So if you have a chord track, whether you have a chord track or not, anything that you put in there will show up. And also, if you add a chord track to, or sorry, if you add a chord to the chord track, let's say that I were to go ahead and, well, actually, this is my C. And let's say that I were to go ahead and add a G here. Then I were to click through to that, you'll see that what I added in the chord track is now showing in my score. So there is some continuity there, certainly between the pitches in the MIDI key editor as well as the score, and there's also continuity with the chord names, the chord symbols that you put in, matching up both the score and the score editor. So I think we've talked about most of the things except expression maps, saving the best for last. I'm going to try and get through this in a relatively quick period of time. Expression maps in Cubase are an entirely different experience than Dorico. Neither better nor worse. In my opinion, actually, the expression maps in Dorico, although they can be a little impenetrable to understand and work with, they actually are more flexible, and I prefer them. And I wish that the expression maps in Cubase were more flexible. Although I like the interface of working with them in Cubase quite a bit, they don't provide me with the same flexibility. But that's really neither here nor there. Mainly, I want to help you understand how this ties in. So I'm going to go ahead, take myself off the screen, and we're going to open this up again, and you'll see that in my notation I've got sort of a sustain, some legato, and then these 4 staccatos before things go back to sustain. And when I play this back, you'll hear those articulations taking effect. You can see I still had the looping enabled there. I really like that feature. Anyway, so what we can see is that it played a sustain followed by some legato followed by some staccatos. So how is it doing that and why? So with the selected track here, you're going to go over to the inspector to this expression map area, which has always been here. It's been a part of Cubase for a long time. And I just created a new one. If you don't have one selected here, I just created one called demo. But you can just click on the cog here, and that opens up this window down here, which is where you would set up your expression map. Now, I'm not going to go deep into this in this lesson, but I will go into this deeper in the future. I just want to wrap my head around it more before I do that. So what you'll see up here is that most expression maps, they have kind of a dummy at the top with no articulations set. For mine, I've set up natural at the top, but it has no articulation set. You kind of want to do that. I named it natural because that's a Dorico convention, that any note that does not explicitly have a playback sample assigned to it would have that. Now the next step is to add the articulations here with this little plus sign. You add the articulations. Let's say that I wanted to add a marcato. Then I can say I send marcato out on channel 4. I don't use key switches, but you could. And then right here, I would come here and I would set this as marcato. And then the symbol will be interpreted correctly. So what's happening here is that if I mark a note as staccato, then it's going to send it out on channel 3, which is, I use channel switching to make sure that my sign player orchestral tools plays back the staccato sample. If I mark something as marcato now, it's going to go out on channel 4. And anything else, I call it natural, but I don't actually have to name that. This is basically just a null and void thing. I'm naming it natural so that it's readable to me, but I'll never see that word again. But most importantly, it just goes through channel 1 and doesn't have any other value. And so I save that as an expression map over here. I could rename it whatever I wanted, you know, my X map, something like that. All right, and then with this track selected over here, I need to make sure that it's selected in this drop-down box, my X map, and you can even see what's going on there. So now when I play this back, the notes that are staccato are using channel 3. The notes that are not staccato, right now, although I have the sustain and the legatos, my expression map doesn't have any differentiation between those, so those are going to play exactly the same way. I would have to go in and add a legato feature. So now that's why I'm getting this playback with the second bar being staccato. So there is actually a rather nice integration, the ability to define how the expression map is going to interpret your notation. So I really like that. Of course, this was the way it was before with the score editor. It's just that before the score editor was not as straightforward. If I wanted to go ahead and mark, let's open this up. If I wanted to go ahead and take the staccato off this half note, right? This is where I would do it. These are the main articulations up here that you would usually find in the left-hand panel of Dorico. So I just go ahead and hit that, and lo and behold, the staccato has been taken off of there. So these are the main articulations up here that you always see on the left-hand side in Dorico, which is really nice. I kind of wish they were on the left side, but they're not. I kind of wish this stuff was on the right side, just because that's where it is in Dorico. They could make that a little smoother. But you'll also see up here, there's an articulation option, and only the ones in my expression map are there. So if I go ahead, for example, and I choose this note here, this C that doesn't have anything, I can see that the articulation is none, which is essentially natural, but I could change it to marcato like that, and I do get the marcato marking, and now that would play back. I don't think you'll hear a difference because I don't actually have my marcato installed at the moment for this demo, but there's two places. You can either use these buttons to assign articulations, or if you have custom articulations that are doing something strange, like let's say you have a harmonic, right? And you come over here and you don't see it here. I mean, I do actually, this would be the harmonic symbol right now, but let's say, you know, you're missing something over here, but you want to use it anyway. It's in your sound library. Instead of worrying about adding playing techniques and all that, all you need to do is go into your expression map, load that up, add a new one, call this, you know, my funky, articulation, like that. Assign whatever you want to it and say, okay, well, this one's going to go out, I don't know, on channel 6. I think 6 is what is the channel I use for pizzicato. But let's say it's something weird. It's not a normal thing. You can still assign that here, and then when you go into your MIDI, you can always say, you know what, I want this note to be my funky thing. So I guess I don't have an articulation. Let me follow through with that so that my demo makes a lot of sense. Let's say I have my funky articulation, and I go and I add custom articulation Just added it down here. I want this to be, you know, capital F for funky. Now it's saved in my, it's already saved in my expression map. I can see it over here. And now when I am here, you'll see that I can actually assign the capital F, funky, to that note. And it would do whatever my expression map said on that note. So in that way, you can actually set up custom articulations that are unique to your library. So there's a lot of flexibility here. I'm going to go into that more in the future. What I wanted to cover today was how you could set up the score editor as your default. I wanted to show you looping because I think that's a really cool feature. I wanted to get into the basics of tying an expression map so anybody who's not sure how to do that could at least start toying around with it. And I also wanted to link, as I have in the description, a link to a PDF from Steinberg. It is their score editor. Let me see if I have that open here. There it is. It's called the Cubase Pro 14 score editor. It's, let me take myself off the camera here. So it's great. This PDF is linked. As you can see, there's a lot of really useful info in here, all about the various things that you can do with it. And I would recommend reading through this because it'll also illuminate how this is different from Darko, how the paradigm is different. Some of the graphics look the same, some features are going to work the same way, but there's a different paradigm underlying it, and I think that's important to understand. Takeaway right now is this is in no way going to replace Darko. If you're doing engravement or engraving and you're doing very precise presentation, Darko is still your software. If, like me, you've mastered a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and your workflow is really smoking, then Darko is still the thing. If you want to be managing custom articulations, things like that, Darko is still the top dog. So this is really just an add-on for people who also use Cubase. If you have questions, please put it in the description, or sorry, post it in comments along with this video. If you're new to my channel, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. And I do read the comments and answer these questions directly, so I look forward to hearing from you guys. I hope everybody's great and having a good Veterans Day and holiday weekend. And I will be back again on Wednesday to share more of what I discover between now and then. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you later. All right.